So here we go, returning to the Schlieffen plan. I promise I will stop returning to this, but I wanted to briefly go. A number of you had some questions. Said Keegan was a little hard to follow, and the video moves a little fast. So I think briefly I take this moment to help answer your question that you've got for discussion is why the Schlieffen plan breaks up. Why it fails. And I think we have to take into account. First, I'll give some general overview, and then in your discussion, I'll provide you a more specific answer. But if we look at the series of battles fought between August and December of 1914, we see for a war mostly known as a static trench war in the West, a war of attrition, we see a lot of movement. And so it wasn't always, the idea that it was destined for trench warfare. It took a while to develop to that. So, if you recall, the idea was for the German army to put, the majority of it in this right wing and have it roll through Belgium, encircle Paris, and then hit the French army from behind, while the other German corps armies were keeping it busy here. So, of course, that also depended on what Schlieffen had said, whether or not France was going to do us a great favor by actually putting its army there and trying to attack this way, which he thought they wouldn't do, which, of course, as we find out, they did. So this is how it was supposed to roll. And remember, this is supposed to happen within 40 days. Okay, and if we look at it more closely, this was sort of the way things were, the way the battle was supposed to develop is if you look at this big green plan here in the dashed lines, we have this sweeping right wing that goes all the way around, hooks around Paris, and moves that way. Also, all the forts were supposed to be captured. And the bulk of the army is on the right wing in this big wheeling movement. Now, what we see is that these solid green lines are the actual invasion. And we'll go through piece by piece to sort of break down what happened. And so if we look at the German attack in 1914, this is the position they wind up by in August, in early September, by the First Battle of the Marne. How do they get there? It actually starts with Belgian forts and the advance through Belgium this way. So, this is the German advance. Notice this positioning of all the German armies here. And in here, Belgium. So, when we look more closely at it, here's a tight map here. We'll get a better map right here. Now, in these early battles, some simple things to keep in mind. The French and Austrian army had very outdated uniforms. How outdated, you might ask? We'll take a look. Here, we see the two different uniforms. The French uniform on the left, okay, and a more modern uniform as worn by the Austrians at the right, or the Germans at the right. Notice the colors. The drabber color, the more earthen color. This was the sort of modern trend. The French and the Austrians had outdated uniforms. And in the cases of the French cavalry, they still wore hats with large plumes on horseback. The reason I mention this is that these bright red trousers and things may have distinguished one in battle in the early days, when the shoulder-fire musket was the common foot soldier's weapon. But here, with high-powered and accurate rifles, these red pants, as well as these tin pots up here, see how the pack is arrayed? So they had to carry their possessions. This is their backpack, their knapsack. Notice what's on the top here. A glistening pot for cooking. That's great, but there are even stories of a young lieutenant Rommel, who would later be General Rommel during the Second World War, using the gleam off the pots to identify French soldiers, so he could shoot them, in battle. So this is not necessarily a very well camouflaged outfit, obviously. But let's take a look at the pack again for a minute. The British and Germans use drab uniforms, darker colors, earthen colors, and so it's not bright, it doesn't stick out. All these infantrymen carried heavy loads. At the very least, on average, the infantrymen carried about 60 pounds of equipment on their backs. So what you're talking about is a 60-pound of equipment to as much as 100 pounds of equipment on their backs. It included their backpack and knapsack, and here you've got your extra bags, and you've got your ammunition cartridge bags. This also includes, on average, a 10-pound rifle, your bayonet, your entrenching tool, your ammunition, about 100 rounds of ammunition, your water canteen, your pack with extra socks and extra shirts, your sack with your rations and your field dressings, your first aid. Additionally, these boots are stiff leather and take a while to be worn in. And so foot care becomes a real issue because these boots could be very rough, and especially in the early phases of this war, you have infantry marching, as much as 25 miles a day by late August, early September, in the August heat, and with not the best boots. Horses. You still have the use of a lot of horses and animals. There are 5,000 horses in an infantry division by 1914, and there's more than 5,000 in a cavalry division. Now, if you're one of the German infantrymen, you're planning, and you're one of the German cavalrymen and things, the war plan calls, Schlieffen plan calls for you to cover about 20 miles a day. And one division, if you think about size, covers about 14 miles. So one of the problems these armies are going to have, as we talked about earlier in the course, is the fact that just moving an army takes a great deal of effort. So if an army can move 20 miles per day, but you don't have a wide enough front to accommodate them, it means they march in a column, and that column is about 14 miles deep. And so just because the front of your army has reached a battle zone doesn't mean the back of your army has. And that 14 miles from the rear to the front can often be the difference, in a day's march. So, right, on average, they said the average foot soldier would march on average estimated 15 miles per day. So in this case, when you think about it, if we were to draw a picture, it would look sort of like this. Okay, so like this, when we look at army sizes, excuse me for using simple green rectangles, but the idea is simple enough. These are two rectangles of equal size. But how I've arrayed them, right, means a great deal of difference. So in this case, this long rectangle here on the right side might mean that it's 14 miles deep. Okay? Here, we're looking at something that's maybe a quarter of that depth, right? So you've got 14 miles deep there, or maybe a third of that size, right? That looks more like a third. So you're talking about what? 6 plus miles deep. So it's much easier. So while this would be a day's march from the rear, so if I was to go from the rear to the front here, following this arrow, this would be roughly a day's march. I mean, I could do it faster and double quick it, but by the time I got to the front to engage the enemy, the troops would have been exhausted. Here, it's 6 miles, roughly. So it's easier to move troops up and get them and put them in position. So having that wide enough front to accommodate your army became very crucial to developing the war plans and prosecuting the Schlieffen Plan for the Germans, but it's also a problem for all of the armies in the First World War. If you look at von Kluck's army, the German army, General von Kluck's army on the right wing, theoretically, if von Kluck was to follow the Schlieffen Plan accordingly, he had roughly 200 miles to cover to get to Paris. Now, let's think about this. Let's say our army is going to exert itself in magnificent fashion, in a way just unprecedented. So let's think of that, 20 miles per day. And that's what the men can do. And we know that we need to get to Paris to have that decisive, to hook ground and have that decisive engagement. And that's 200 miles. Okay? So 20 miles a day. And we need to go 200 miles. And how many days would it take at 20 miles a day? Now, that's at high exertion, and we need to account for the fact that we're going to also fight battles. So we need to realistically call it 15 miles per day. Okay? So if we do our little algebra, we come up with roughly 13 days it should take von Kluck's army to go those 200 miles. And that's not counting for battle time or anything else. So, but if you think about it, that's X in this case is the number of days that you have to get there, right? And we're not going to be precise. It'll be rounded, but about 13 days. So that means by day 40, you need your decisive action. So that means that you have left 13 days for heavy marching, right? And hopefully you can travel faster than that. And in fact, they did. So one of the things that turned out was actually the men moved a little faster. Then some cases moving 20 to 25 miles a day, which means that they could have gotten there in 10 days if they just had to march. The other problem that you have to face as this army moves forward is not just a speed problem, right? It's also a supply problem, because the further Germany moves out on this plan, okay, the further away it moves from its base of supplies. So here, this is von Kluck's first army of the German army, right? And this is his big wheel that was 200 miles. The other commanders don't have as far to march. And this area would be very important, this internal piece here, because this is where the battle many people thought might be decided. But you see the concentration, right? So, but you also see that the further the German army moves out, let's say von Kluck is here, by Abbeville, and you've got the Second Army under Bülow here, the German advance is well underway. The problem is that their supply line is much further from Germany, and so they need to continually think about how many supplies they need, how they feed their horses, and everything else. And that becomes a real issue. And so one of the things people don't think about is, we've talked about, one of your readings has said, the Schlieffen Plan had a number of problems about, needing more people, timetables, everything else. Some people have faulted the Schlieffen Plan's effect in World War I because it wasn't followed. There's some people who argue, well, it wasn't really followed, so it's not that the plan failed, it's that the Germans failed the plan. One of the other harsh realities is, and we'll talk about this a little more in depth, is that it just did not, it overstretched supply lines and stretched logistics. So that becomes a real problem. So we have the Conquest of Belgium, and it starts here at Liege. So you notice these lines, as this map shows the German Conquest of Belgium, right? We see the lines. And Liege is really one of the first keys, because with Liege, what Belgium had was a series of well-constructed forts. And so in order to sweep and move that Schlieffen plan, the German army decided to send a force ahead of time to take out those forts, to clear a way for that big German right wing to come in, fill Belgium, and sweep down. So first you clear out the forts, then the main body of the wing can come around on its encircling movement. So here, okay, this is the principal German lines of attack, these arrows. Okay, and the Belgian army is not big. It's small. It's not as well equipped as the Germans. And so the fortresses became important points, rallying points and defense points. And the first that the Germans really encounter is the city of Liege. And so they go after Liege. General von Ludendorff, the German General von Ludendorff, took charge and really helped to turn the battle in favor of the Germans. Okay, so here we are. The First Army here under General von Kluck would move up this way. And what we have here, okay, is the Second Army under Bülow moving towards Liege. Okay. The Belgian General in Chief, Emmick, General Emmick, well, I'm sorry, that's the German. General Le Mans is the Belgian in command. Sorry, I'm getting my names mixed up. But the point is, so General Emmick will be one of the Germans who will advance. And you see this ring of forts? This circle around the city is a ring of forts. And so what Bülow has to do is crack this line, get in here, and neutralize these forts. That's easier said than done, because when you take a look at these forts, they are well constructed and they are pretty tough. In fact, this is kind of what they look like. So this is a diagram with multiple views. So coming up on it at ground level, this is what you would have seen. You would have seen these things dug into the ground with these big turrets, like a tank turret on the top. So on the top it would all be armored here, and these would be concrete structures down and inside, which you can see you have barracks and storage facilities and ammo rooms. And you see here are turrets. Those turrets are massive artillery guns, and they can be moved around and put in defense of the fort. You also use a triangular positioning. Okay, the triangular position is useful. It's helpful. It's good as a defensive position. And these forts are ringed in support of one another so that they can mutually support the other forts. So they're arranged in this defensive ring. You have this triangle layout, and you have these multiple turrets that can fire. So the question is, the Germans have to overcome this ring to sort of keep moving along and keep the Schlieffen plan going. How do they do it? This is one way they did it. So what happens is that the early fighting around these Belgian forts was quite pitched, and the French certainly could have been helpful. And certainly the Belgians asked for French help, saying, please come here, help us, help us do this defense. But the French were concerned, because you see here what we see is the French were more concerned at this point that this was not the main body of Germans. The main body of Germans was going to be along the front, the German-French frontier. And the French were implementing their own Plan 17, if you recall. And in fact, they asked Belgians to join the French and form the left wing. The British, seeing that the Belgian sovereignty was violated, sent 4 divisions. And they were supposed to send 6, but they kept 2 at home. Now later on, this would change. But what happens and how they crack this defensive ring is by penetrating it, but also bringing in one of those tools I just showed you, and I'll pull it back up right now. This is the Big Bertha, the M. Gerät from Germany. It's a 420 millimeter cannon. Okay, it's also known as the Big Bertha. Its maximum range was 10,000 yards, so it could fire quite a long distance. It had a powerful shell, and notice the plates put on the wheels to help stabilize it when it shoots with a hydraulic arm. This piece of artillery could crack through the actual defenses in those forts. Here we also see the Austrian 305 millimeter howitzer, also used for the same purpose. And this is what it did to turrets. So it actually had a delayed fuse timing, so the shell was designed to puncture that turret and then blow up. So I mean, it is an amazing and destructive piece of artillery. But once the first set of forts was taken out, after that, it became much easier to start cracking these other forts. And so what you see is, waste. This is what those guns did to these forts. It laid them absolute waste. But once you get the ring around the edge, then the German army is cleared. So you see besieged fortresses there, right? And these towns, the Germans move through. And as you saw, right, the story of the sack of Leuven. So here, after this ring of forts got cracked, right, by the German advance, and really the person who really takes charge during this process is German General von Ludendorff. He takes over on August 6th, directing field howitzers versus the Belgians. And General Le Mans is eventually captured. He's knocked unconscious after the last the last fort in this ring was taken. The fort called Lansin. And he was knocked unconscious and captured. And he actually asked Ludendorff to attest to the fact that he was knocked unconscious, and that's how he was taken. And still this idea of martial respect and honor still allowed him to keep his sidearm in respect. The guns were further moved to target more forts, and what these marked, as John Keegan concludes correctly, is really the end of the age of fortresses as the main stronghold. Other armies would build fortresses afterwards, but nothing like this network where people had full faith that they would defend. Because what it showed is that mobility and technology had the ability to completely overcome and overwhelm these forts. But what happens is at the same time, the French are trying to execute their Plan 17. And so as we look through on the Western Front, the French are actually trying to move their Plan 17 on the Germans while this is all going on in Belgium. They first move into Alsace-Lorraine, and they are pushed back by the Germans and retreat rather rapidly. In fact, so much so that General Joffre fires the commander, just absolutely appalled by the behavior, the willingness to retreat so quickly. At the same time, the Germans are experiencing greater success. Okay, so here you have these big pockets of defense, and Antwerp became the place that the Belgian king decided was going to be the last stand, sort of the Alamo position of Belgium's defense, so to speak. The Germans warned the Belgians. Any destruction of bridges, any opposition would be seen as an act of war, and there would be punishment for that. What you get because of that is really the Germans sort of casting caution to the wind. And I'll blow this picture up here so you can see it really good. I'll widen it a bit so it'll look a little unnatural. But here, after Liege, these places were cities and towns where the German army actually killed civilians. And that really comes to a head because they're opposed, but not terribly opposed as they move in here to the city of Leuven. Leuven, as you read about, is a Belgian cultural center. It's their college town and place where their cultural heritage was protected and housed. And the Germans, soldiers basically rioted. German army lost control of its soldiers, and they rioted and indiscriminately started killing civilians because of the resistance of the civilians to the German march. This totally changed world opinion of Germany and really basically cast Germany in such a negative light early in the war that a lot of countries around the world that might have even had some sympathies to the German side of things, the German viewpoint, certainly were not so amenable afterwards. So Antwerp is the final sort of the Alamo position, and the Germans do march through Belgium rather rapidly. And this Leuven offensive starts by August 14th. So, you have mobilization by August 1. By August 14th, the Germans are already in Leuven. And then they're also dealing with the Germans further south, or the French further south. So here we have the Belgians coming undone, Antwerp becoming this final defensive position. Also, you see this dot with the ring around it? These were cities with rings of forts. But as long as you have some of those weapons that we just saw, those forts don't necessarily mean great security. The after picture of the city of Leuven, you can see the rubble, the city leveled. But afterwards, you also get these cartoons, which carry great impact in combatant countries as well as non-combatant countries. For example, this cartoon, the German, what was called the German Rape of Belgium. So you have the arrogant German soldier with the pickle helmet and the nose pincher glasses holding its gun to the virtuous half-naked woman that represents Belgium. You have stark ones like this as well. And the Germans move rather rapidly through Belgium. So one of the issues becomes, and this, by the way, is a close-up of the Liege forts. So as you go around, you can see the city was here. It's surrounded by this ring of forts. And it starts in this ring. But one of the things that happens as soon as they get in, you have the Krupp mortars, the Skoda, the Howitzers, which just pounds these fortresses into oblivion and forces the surrender and capitulation of the city. Right, so the rapid reduction of the fortresses at Liege, it was due primarily to the overwhelming firepower of the German siege artillery, which went on to equal success at Antwerp. But as you go through, the Germans take out these cities, these fortress cities. Here's the bombardment of Namur. Where is Namur? Well, we'll point it out on the map. Namur is here, and Antwerp is here. So those two blow up that we're going to see after this one. Liege was the other fortress city. So you have 1, 2, 3 major fortress areas here. And so that's one of the 3 things the German army would target. So here, what we'll see is, once again, targeting, shelling these forts, weakening them, and then moving your soldiers in to take what's left. So the forts are attacked by these big mortars and howitzers, the big Bertha gun, and really cracks them open and forces the garrisons to capitulate. It is a pitched struggle, a scary one, and certainly a deadly one, but it doesn't last that long. So thus ends the rush through Belgium. So we see this part of the German army rushing through Belgium. So the question is, what are the French doing at this time? So we'll see that in a moment, and the beginning of the Battle of the Frontiers. Of course, the sweep through Belgium certainly considered a part of it, but I've treated it a little differently. But what can we ask ourselves about the Schlieffen plan so far? So far, it seems to be working. The equipment, the motion has been going through Belgium rather rapidly. The Belgians have put up a defense, but it hasn't been effective enough. The British are under strength, so they're not providing the same determined resistance. And here, the Germans are moving on pace and on time, roughly.